80s and 90s, Yakima gained a reputation as really one of the highest crime areas, not only in the state but the country. But those numbers have significantly dropped over the last 20 years. We still have problems, but we really want to get the message out that we have made significant strides. And I came on the police department as a public information officer at the latter part of July, and that's when I first met Joe. And so he's been doing a great job putting together the numbers to let the public know not only that the numbers have dropped, but to really dig deeper into those numbers and to explain really what's happening, how our crime's reported. And so I'm just going to hand it over to Joe Brown, who is our crime analyst with the Yakima Police Department. And this is Don Whitehouse, the director of the Department of Transportation. We just jumped in. Go ahead, take it over, Joe.
Well, good afternoon. Thanks for the introduction. First off, I want to thank Thane for inviting me here to speak to you guys today. It's always a good opportunity to interact with the public, meet some of the chamber, and so I hope this isn't the first time, or hope this isn't the last time. So this is the first time. So I am the Crime and Intelligence Analyst with the Yakima Police Department. I actually came on a bit after Mike in the beginning of September, so I've been here just over 6 months or so. And one of the things I've been tasked with is sort of, to look at the state of crime in the city of Yakima, and then both on an historical basis and then moving forward in 2015. Now this presentation isn't, again, I want it to be as informal as possible. So if you do have questions, feel free to ask, or you can just make sure you write them down, or hold to the end. I'd be happy to answer them. What I believe is most important is presenting this information, but at the same time understanding that every city has issues, and we're still working at those issues, and we're going to take proactive efforts to move forward from here. So, without further ado, 2 main topics for the discussion today. The first is to provide the context of the information I'm about to present. Okay, I think the context of, especially when it comes to numbers, because there's a bit of mystery that always surround numbers and statistics. We see them everywhere, but not a lot of people understand how they're derived, where they're derived, right, and how we actually compile those things, how it's reported. So this discussion shouldn't just be pertaining to this particular presentation, but just numbers and statistics in general. And then I'll kind of dovetail into why it's important for crime statistics. So just explaining numbers, we see them on billboards, on the front of newspapers and magazines. You see percentages, right? And not a lot of people understand that people are naive in essence. I'm not saying anything of a particular individual, but generally the public tends to be a bit naive about numbers. The higher it is towards 100%, the more threatening it is. The lower it is towards 0%, the better it is. Okay? But you have to understand where it's coming from, what it's saying, what the sample is, how it's derived, because all of that can be changed, especially if a person's coming from a viewpoint, if that makes any sense. All right. So again, variables that can influence crime statistics, and we'll talk briefly about those, reporting methods and specifics. The 2 main national reporting methods, the Uniform Crime Report and the National Incident-Based Reporting System. Briefly talk about those and then point you to areas where you can get more information if you see fit. And then again, making sense of numbers. Second main deal that I'd like to talk about today, again, is the descriptive statistics that you probably came here to hear about. The crime in the city of Yakima from a historical basis, basically from 1985 to present. Okay? And we'll be primarily dealing with Part 1 crimes, and I'll get into what those are a little bit later on. Okay? Because we want to compare ourselves to surrounding jurisdictions to get that "are we doing well" framework. In addition to that, a detailed breakdown, and then not only just, okay, this is what happened, this is where we are, but how are we going to use that to move forward from here? Okay? So that's the main overview of the discussion. So again, first off, the context. There's a variety of variables. When a city seeks to determine whether or not we're doing well, we seek to compare ourselves to surrounding jurisdictions, cities, and national rates and averages. Okay. Now there's a bit of a problem with doing that. So you take raw numbers in the city of Yakima and try to compare that to a city with a much larger population and a much less of a population. Raw numbers will be significantly out of skew. I mean, it seems relatively intuitive that that would be the case, but you'd be surprised at how many times people make mistakes and try to compare raw numbers of a city of 300, 400,000 to a city of 20 or 30,000, right? Now, if I were to sit here, and again, this isn't a quotable number, right? If I were to sit here and tell you that in the city of Seattle there were 4,500 motor vehicle thefts, people would say, well, that's a ton. Well, is it? Right? If I put our auto thefts next to Seattle's raw numbers, you can't really make a comparison. You derive very little comparative value out of those particular numbers. So we got to put things in context again. Right? Being that it varies from state to state, from jurisdiction to jurisdiction, we have to standardize the population, and we generally do that by expressing counts over a common denominator. Right? Per 1,000, per 10,000, per 100,000. Okay? And it's very easy to get the others. If you have a per 1,000 count, it's very easy to get per 10,000, 100,000. You just multiply by 10 or 100, okay? Now, there's a bit of caveat when you do that. Sometimes it's expressed. We do per 1,000 because we are an agency that doesn't have over 100,000, or where a jurisdiction doesn't have over 100,000 as far as the representing population. Right? 2013 census estimates put us around 93 or 94,000 individuals within the city, okay? So the caveat is you can express our numbers per 100,000. What that would actually do is inflate the raw number, our raw number, to project the amount if we had 100,000. Okay, that's the only thing. And again, that's not necessarily, it's not wrong to report it that way, right? In some places you will. I mean, we saw a news article just 2-3 weeks ago, reporting everything per 100,000, and Yakima's numbers were on that. Okay, so not necessarily wrong, but the consumer needs to understand that that's actually higher than the raw count, right? And people get lost in the numbers a little bit. And essentially, the beginning of this discussion is just to make us educated consumers of what we're getting on a daily basis. When we passed that billboard and it says 77% of people who had a cigarette had this happen to them, right? Well, it's really important to understand where those numbers were derived from, what the sample was, so that again, we can be educated consumers of what the media is saying, billboards are saying, and obviously departments like the Yakima Police Department are saying. Okay, so context. Be aware that I'm talking about two main variables that influence crime statistics in this discussion, but be aware that those are not the only two. Okay, it's not mutually exclusive. Think about it in terms of economy, demographics, socioeconomic status, businesses, things of that nature, all could influence what's going on in the city. When we study people in their environments, right, it's very, very hard. And, if anybody's ever looked into social science research, it's very, very hard to control for all the variables that might be influencing something that we're trying to measure, right? So to bring it down into, well, these are the three main things that might be influenced, it actually breaks it down into too simplistic of an argument, right? There's a variety of things that might be influencing why a person becomes deviant, why a city has a high crime rate, or why a particular area of a city has an issue, right? And it can't be explained with a few variables. So just keep that in mind. We're touching on two, but there are many, okay? The second major one that needs to be accounted for and standardized, sort of like population, are laws, right? This is a rough paraphrase, but anything not specifically enumerated in the Constitution is left up for the states to decide, right? So that's why laws vary from state to state, okay? So what does that really mean? How does that translate into a difference? Well, it translates into a difference because the criteria that meets a burglary or any other crime that you might be looking at, the criteria that meets, that you have to meet to charge for that burglary or to arrest for that particular offense might vary from state to state. Okay, so that way, again, if you're looking at local numbers, even if the jurisdiction you have has a similar population, let's just say there's another city with 93,500 individuals with similar demographics and all that type of stuff, right? Located in an adjacent state, well, we can just compare them. Well, you still can't compare them because it's reported differently, locally, if that makes sense, okay? Not only do the criteria vary from state to state as far as what constitutes that particular idea, right, but also the categorizations vary, okay? So again, we run into that situation if we can't compare that apple to an orange, we need an apple to an apple, right? So what do? We standardize it. Now, the two reporting methods that I'll discuss in a second seek to standardize these methods and establish guidelines to agencies in 400, 500 pages of documentation on how to go off and do this so that it's done in a standardized, systematic way so that we can get as close to possible numbers that we can compare across jurisdictions, cities, and states. Okay, so again, that's only meaning not equal, right? That's not saying Arizona's law is bad. All right.
Well, there is no law in Arizona.
Well, no comment. All right, two national reporting systems as I touched on before. The Uniform Crime Report, been around a while, and the National Incident-Based Reporting System. Okay. Now, the differences between these are, I mean, we're reporting on the same types of crimes and it's reporting the same things, but the aggregations and the categories do vary. So when you're looking at a NIBRS reporting agency or a NIBRS report, as opposed to a UCR, the numbers vary, and if you don't understand that difference, you might ask yourself again the question, why? And again, the beginning of this discussion is to educate yourself to say, okay, that might be the difference, let's investigate further, okay? Aggregates crimes into Part 1 and Part 2 index offenses. It's a summary-based reporting system, this is the UCR, and it has a hierarchy rule. We'll touch on the hierarchy rule in a second. National Incident-Based Reporting System takes the UCR and sort of expands on it. It tracks more variables in a much more detailed way, okay? Aggregates crimes into Group A, Group B, only really collects arrest data on Group B. But within your Group A offenses, the subsets are persons, property, and society, okay? Again, that's not really pertinent to today's discussion necessarily, but just a bit of, for your information. Right? And again, there's no hierarchy rule. So what is this hierarchy rule? Anybody know what it is? In the UCR, they take the most serious crime, and that's the one that's reported. Right? So it's a single offense. So it's a single incident, one offense. A single incident, one offense. Okay? The National Incident-Based Reporting System doesn't have that requirement. So it does exist, the possibility exists to have one incident, multiple crimes. Does that make sense? All right, it's not that ranked. I mean, they're still ranked in essence, right? We're not talking about crimes that are included in the offense, the lesser included offenses. If you guys have ever heard that term before, meaning when I walk into a gas station, I point a gun at the the attendant and demand money. I've actually committed not just one crime. We always just think about one crime, but you've probably committed like 3 or 4 crimes in there, right? Not all those are included, right? Because those are actually included in the commission of that one offense. We're talking about if I went and did an armed robbery, then I also did a forcible rape. Does that make sense?
Can you cite an example of the multiple crimes that are committed? If I go in and I point a gun at you, that's one offense. What other offenses are there?
Well, there would be, depending on what you did. If you discharged a weapon, you could get a firearms offense. You could get unlawful possession of a firearm.
Trespassing or?
Sure.
That.
Yeah, depending on the criteria of the particular situation, a single 2-line scenario of a person walking in might yield the violation, and it's not always overt. It's not always like, would you actually be charged for those offenses? Is not necessarily the case. Oftentimes 6 offenses will occur in a brief interaction of an armed robbery or whatever it might be. That's not necessarily what will be charged out, right? So. Oftentimes that's not the case. They'll be kind of thrown away, or they'll be, whatever. I'm not sure the policies of the prosecution that they would deal with in that particular situation, right? But what this is basically saying, the hierarchy rule, is it will be reported. So what does that really mean for our numbers? Well, statistics say about 10% of cases actually yield a second or third offense, right? So that it does exist a possibility to actually, since you're reporting more, it makes it look like the numbers will go up. Does that make sense? Right? Where before in the UCR, you're not. Now this has 0 impact on local stats. Okay, again, this is just the way that it's reported and mandated to the federal reporting. Make sense? All right. And again, this isn't an entire discussion on this. I just want to give a good round education on what crime statistics are so that you can better understand what you're about to receive. So if it seems a bit monotonous or, but if you want to know more, I'll be happy to provide any links. There's a lot of documentation on it that you can actually follow up on and get a better gist of it. And where I'd be happy to sit down and have a further discussion with anyone. The FBI established both these reporting systems to address the comparative issues we talked about, the standardization issues, right? They are not without limitations. As with any social science study, they're not without limitations. There's variables we cannot account for. There are reporting issues among agencies. There's a variety of things. Being that the UCR and the National Incident-Based Reporting System are still both in use, right? A lot of agencies are transitioning to the National Incident-Based Reporting System, but the entire nation isn't, right? And actually, we still have agencies, although there's the RCWs do mandate that all agencies within Washington are using National Incident-Based Reporting System now, right? There's still agencies that are in that transition phase, okay? So when you look at, WASPIC's website, they'll actually have a section where it's NIBRS reporting and UCR reporting, okay? So again, just to clarify any confusion, all right? We're in that transition, so depending on if Seattle's reporting UCR and somebody else is reporting NIBRS, the categories are like this, if that makes any sense. All right. This report will primarily deal with Part 1 crimes. It deals with 8 crime categories, 4 persons, 4 property. Okay, murder, forcible rape, robbery, and aggravated assault are your persons crimes, and your property offenses are motor vehicle theft, burglary, larceny, and arson. Okay. Now these are the main ones that most agencies, and actually cities in general, and even nationally, that they seek to compare one another. These are the big heavy hitters. Okay. We collect data on all the crimes, but this report is just primarily dealing with just Part 1s. Some links at the bottom, FBI.gov/UCR, and then WASPIC, which is the state website. They have a plethora of information that you can access on there. Reports, guides, historical numbers dating all the way back to, I believe, the early 80s. All right, go ahead.
Larceny, is that include like graffiti, defacing properties?
The vandalism, I'd have to double check to see. On your larceny and theft offenses would not include your vandalisms. All right, that would be a Part 2 offense.
Okay.
Okay.